I'm not a risk taker at all. I'm really risk averse, actually, which is usually one of the key things to be an entrepreneur.
Sema, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sema, you've been a consultant for a very long time. It's been about 15 years now that you have your own company.
Yeah.
I'm curious, how did you get started in that business?
Yeah. You're making me sound old, a very long time. It's true. It
No,
has been a while.
a decade and a half.
It's all good. So I like to consider myself sort of a reluctant entrepreneur in the sense that it was never on my radar to be in business for myself or to be an entrepreneur. It sounded completely foreign to me. So I kind of say sometimes I'm an entrepreneur by accident because it just sort of happened. And you know, I grew up with a very traditional sort of household where you know you go and work for a big company, you hopefully get like a nice pension. I started off in accounting as a CPA, and so you know, very stable. And then over time, I started to do different things and realized that yeah, that wasn't what I was really passionate about. So I switched into HR, and it just sort of happened over time that this opportunity presented itself to sort of do what I'd call like the side hustle and like a little bit of consulting on the side. And then it just kind of snowballed. So it was never, I'm always so impressed with people that just sort of leave everything and start their own business from scratch and they, you know, put a lot of investment to it. I'm not a risk taker at all. I'm really risk averse, actually, which is usually one of the key things to be an entrepreneur. And so I was really risk averse. So I probably had a bit of an unorthodox way of coming sort of into my own and starting consulting.
I really appreciate the honesty. That's a very different perspective of what I usually get. So, when you start your business, it's really different from working in a corporate job, whether HR or anything else. So, do
Yes.
you have any people around you that helped
Yeah.
you out to get started,
Yeah.
kick things off?
So I'll give you a little bit of background how it sort of fell into my lap. I was doing accounting. I didn't like it. Went back to school, did an MBA, which was helpful. Like, so I had the business background, which ended up helps me a lot as in you know, running the business. So that sort of the business mindset was already there. But I really liked HR, so I actually worked at National Bank for 5 years in HR, and I was working actually in employment equity at the time. That was like 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, and diversity and all that stuff. Um, I didn't know that role even existed. So for me, it was super interesting. And I was doing training and you know, working with managers and just sort of part of the HR, this big HR team. And then I had my first son. I was on, you know, I took my mat leave. I came back working part time, nice and cushy. Then they had the financial crisis when I was on my second mat leave. And so my position got cut, which ended up being a blessing in disguise. I kind of was probably a little too comfortable in the role I was in. It wasn't necessarily, I'd taken a pay cut to get into HR and gone like at least a 15-20% pay cut because I really wanted to go in HR. And so it forced me to sort of re-question what I was doing. And at the time, I wasn't sure what to do. I was sort of, you know, at home thinking about it. And I really liked the diversity space. So I actually did reach out to someone who was doing consulting. She was an HR consultant. Someone on my soccer team, actually, who I knew had her own business. And she really sat down with me and explained to me kind of what she does as a consultant and how she got into it. And she introduced me actually to someone else who was in the same space as myself. And I met with her. And so I just started meeting with people and having a lot of discussions and using my network. I had a pretty good network from having worked in HR and started reaching out to people and saying, hey, do you need training? Do you need this? Do you need that? So in the beginning, the types of little contracts I got were not necessarily in the diversity space. They was like performance management or HR. You know, at the beginning, I think you just say yes to a lot of different things, and a lot of imposter syndrome. You know, people ask for things, you're like, yeah, I could do that. And there was no Chat GPT back then, so you really had to like figure it out, do research. So I say a lot of it was sort of trying different things. But I had the luxury of I was married at the time. My husband at the time had a really stable job. So that's when I say sort of I have so much respect for people who just give it up and jump into everything. I didn't have a lot of risk involved at that point because, you know, I could kind of try different things. And if it didn't work, I still had a roof over my head. I had, you know, young kids. I was, you know, started working part time. And it just sort of built on its own as I guess I was good at what I was doing, and then it just started snowballing and getting bigger and bigger. But I was still looking for something more permanent in the sense I liked being independent, but there's never consistency when you're consulting, right? You get projects, they end. There's, the first thing that people cut, I do a lot of training is when there's a recession or whatever, it's training. But I was lucky enough at some point through my network to get a more permanent part-time role at McGill at the Career Services department, where I was coaching MBA students. I'd done my MBA. I had worked in recruitment, so I got a 2 day a week contract with them, and that was sort of the turning point for me with everything. It was still a contract, so I was still, quote, technically consulting. My boss was fantastic, and I was able to sort of do that, and then also do the diversity, equity stuff on my own business on the side. So that was something that was really helpful, is having something where it was consistent income, a few days a week, part-time, and then being able to still, slowly build up my business on the side. So that's sort of how I guess I, mitigated that risk, and there was something consistent. And then on the side was where all these other little projects were coming from and building up from that. So that was really helpful for me, to have a little bit of stability, but still flexibility to do consulting work.
But I really think you should take more credit because it's not that as simple as you make it sound. Um, but I'm curious about why the diversity and inclusivity
Yeah,
piqued your interest. Like it seems
yeah,
like you wanted to get into this specifically for a while. So why is that the
yeah.
field or the niche you wanted?
I think it was when I was studying in my bachelor's degree, I did accounting and HR, and I always liked HR, people side, all that stuff. And I had taken there's a course in cross cultural management, and I always found it fascinating. I'm born and raised in Montreal, but my parents are immigrants here. You're navigating also the Anglo-Franco stuff. You're navigating being a woman of color, like all these different things. So I was naturally interested in that. And the whole cross-cultural thing was cool. I was like, wow, it's so interesting how cultures act differently. And so I was always very interested in that. And so when I went, my first role actually, National Bank, wasn't in HR. It was in accounting. I couldn't get a job after my MBA in accounting in HR, because just like everybody else, you have one background. It's very hard to career switch. And it's so funny. I became a career coach because I was a terrible student, I would say, in terms of, I was just applying to everything thinking, oh, of course they're going to hire me. I could do this work. And I had no background for it. So I luckily, one of my old bosses from the accounting firm hired me at National Bank on a contract and said, listen, I'll help you network with the HR department. And if you find something great, and that's what happened. I didn't even know this role existed. So at some point there was an opening in employment equity and diversity department, a mat leave replacement. And I didn't even know this role existed. I was like, wow, this is really cool. And so I got that job, and it was very interesting because even at the time, this is 2003, there was probably like 150 people in HR at the bank, and probably 3 of us were not white. So you can imagine it was quite, and I was probably the only Anglophone. So it was really interesting, and it was great. My colleagues were great, but I definitely felt different, and I had a lot of opportunities to learn a lot and do a lot of training and sort of opened people's mindsets. And so that's really what piqued my interest, I'd say, in the field of diversity. And I just had the good fortune of really being in the right place at the right time, because there was very few jobs like that at the time. And so today I'm able to sort of leverage all that experience that I've been in this space for a long time. But at the time I didn't even know those jobs existed. So it just became a sort of a natural progression for me.
But yeah, Montreal is a very diverse city. I mean, in your
Yeah.
particular situation that you cited, being a tiny percentage in that room
Yeah.
is, I mean, it must have been tough, but nowadays I mean, especially in the city, anywhere you go, you're always finding yourself surrounded by people from all over the planet,
Yeah.
which is really fascinating. Like you have
Yeah.
these great conversations with people with totally different experiences. So do you think that helps in the field you're in? Because
Yeah.
people need to be able to navigate through those discussions, especially in the corporate world, what to
Yes.
say, what not to say, how to make sure everyone's comfortable.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there's so much, Montreal, for example, has so much diversity. I mean, Canada, everywhere, really, there's a lot of diversity. And employers are always trying to find ways to, you know, properly manage their workforce, and whether it's gender, whether it's age is a big thing now.
Hmm.
Different cultures. There's so many angles to diversity. We talk a lot now about neuro inclusion. So it's always shifting and changing. And so I think for that reason, it'll always be an important topic. And yeah, of course, we're influenced by what happens in the US. So there's a lot of, backlash and all these different things happening in the DI space. In Canada, so far, in my experience, and at least with the people and clients I work with, there hasn't been a negative impact. It's almost like a lot of these companies are saying, no, we're not like that, and we want to keep on doing this good work in this space. And because I mean, it's a global market, right? We know more and more that we need to have the greatest talent, the best talent, and the best talent comes in all shapes and sizes and colors and forms. And so when you kind of just sort of come back to the basics of why it's important, I think it's always important, but there's still a lot of demand, I think, for and especially in Quebec, because as Quebec also the market expands. We're doing some work sometimes with like companies in Quebec City and different regions. It's starting, and those places are not as diverse yet as Montreal, and so they're still dealing maybe with some issues that maybe I dealt with 15, 20 years ago, and they're reoccurring in different places. But that's totally normal because everyone's going to be at a different point in that journey. So for me, it's still a passion. Yeah,
Yeah, I love that you mentioned age diversity. Now, that's
yeah,
something I never really think about, but it's
yeah,
true. I mean,
yeah.
sometimes you're in a room with people from a different generation, and there's a real gap. It's like they're from another, completely different country. But
Yeah, it's like another planet.
yeah, and I want to ask you, so people come to you because they want to make their people or their company culture more inclusive. I mean, how does it work when
Yeah.
someone comes to you? How do you help them?
So there's two things. Sometimes, so I have to differentiate between sort of the one-off check the box people and the organizations that are really, interested in this work, because at the end of the day, everybody wants their employees to be happy and included, because we all know that, employees who are happy to go to work, who feel included, who feel part of the team, they're going to perform better. There's going to be less turnover. There's so much research that pours into that. And sometimes I think everyone gets so complex and, oh, why do we have to do this? At the end of the day, we want people to be happy at work and included. And a lot of organizations understand that. They want to have a culture where people really feel they belong, so that they can, produce at their best, et cetera. And so usually when organizations come to me, sometimes they're coming to me because they've had a request from employees. So it does happen where employees say, we'd love to have an unconscious bias training, or we need to learn about anti-racism, or and sometimes and it's important, but sometimes that request is coming more of a reactive request. Maybe they've had an incident, they've had some tensions, people really want that information. And so um, that's one type of demand. And then others are a little bit more strategic in it, where it's, the leadership team, management, they understand they need to build out a strategy. They need to make, training part of that strategy. So I get the two requests. I've learned to ask a lot of questions when I get the reactive request, because it has happened in the past earlier on where I was put in a situation where I shouldn't have been, where somebody maybe thinks diversity training is going to solve a performance issue, or they have a toxic culture with discrimination and overt sexism, racism, and then they have a mandatory training. And there I am, and it's like, okay, why am I here? I'm not training is not going to solve
Mm.
the issue that this manager is racist, right? So I learned to ask questions a lot better about, what's the team like, what's the issue, and then I say a lot of times I say no. I say, listen, that's not going to help. It's actually going to make it worse by doing a training. What does your leadership look like? What are they involved? Ask a lot more questions. And surprisingly, a lot of times the person who might have reached out, the HR person, it's happened a few times with like, oh, we hadn't thought about that. And then they do involve the leadership team. And then we start with that and we kind of move down. That's usually my goal, because if you don't, and it doesn't matter whether it's diversity or any strategy, if the leadership team is not fully engaged, it's not really going to work, right? It's not really going to transcend on the company. So those requests sort of come in different ways, but I try to ask a lot of questions to make sure that if I'm doing training or something, it's part of a bigger plan versus just a check the box reactive type thing. And we saw a lot of the backlash is because companies were doing these check the box one offs. Let's just do this training. Everyone's happy. And then, it doesn't make any change.
So why do you think people would do this? Like, let's talk about the check the box
Yes.
that you mentioned. Is it because you think it's like pressure from employees? Is it political pressure? Is it just like the image of the company? They're trying to change the image of the like.
Yeah.
Why would they do it? I mean,
Well,
what's the
all
reason
of
why
the
they would do
above.
it?
I think one of the biggest catalysts for a lot of the check the box types training was the murder of George Floyd. This is what completely changed the DI landscape because the
You
this was the
you think
first.
like corporations here felt it as much
Oh,
as
100%. Yeah,
yeah?
yeah, yeah. So for me personally, so I was sort of doing this side hustle. I was at McGill and I was doing my business on the side. And after George Floyd's murder, I had like, there's so much demand now for training in English, French. I do it in French as well. That I left my McGill role because I was like, okay, I need to concentrate 100% on the business because it's just expanding. And personally, I think my revenues like quadrupled within a year, and then it's just been like it just completely changed the landscape. Two things happened. First, and I mean it's sad that it took this occasion because most of us knew that racism was an issue in Canada, U.S., everywhere. But it was a wake up call for a lot of well intentioned companies who thought that they were doing good work in this space. But when they reached out to their employees, a lot of companies were doing interviews with their employees, focus groups. What they learned was a lot of their Black employees in particular were experiencing discrimination at work. There was almost, it opened up this can of worms where a lot of organizations thought they were doing good work and then they realized, wow, we've got this wrong. We haven't been doing this properly. And so what changed, at least for me, was I used to do a lot of employee training. All of a sudden it was like leadership team trainings and board of directors who are genuinely interested. And so that's where the sort of demand came from, is just this recognition that wow, we're really not doing this right. And then a lot of it also, some organizations that say yes, they were genuinely doing it for the right reasons. Others were very reactive because the pressure, right? Everybody, oh, Black Lives Matter, we have to do something. Okay, we need to have a workshop for like racism. Like they started just, we got to do the, oh, Me Too movement. We have, oh, it's Pride Month. They just started getting very reactive because there was a lot of societal pressure to do these things. But you can see today, if you didn't do it properly back then, today that's where a lot of the backlash comes from. Those companies are not doing anything anymore. Um, you know, the industry itself kind of really peaked and now it's like slowing down for a lot of people, so it's very interesting, but a lot of it came from, I'd say, a catalyst was the Black Lives Matter movement, and then also this reaction to a lot of people feeling pressure from employees to do something, the reaction, so both, a little bit of both.
Sima, I'm curious about the how you measure the impact because let's talk about the training. You do a
Yeah,
training, you're done.
yeah.
Now you understand things in theory, but did people, I mean, do you look at people 6 months later if they're still getting any incidents? Like, how does that work? How do you measure the
Yeah,
impact?
that's a tricky part too. Because for me, in the beginning, I used to say yes to everything, and I would be doing strategy work, and I would be doing like training and all kinds of things. And over time, I sort of started to get a niche of a niche. So I really focus on the leadership training piece of it, and I work with other colleagues who are going to work on the action plans and the strategies. So usually, it's very hard to measure. Like it's more of a longer term. You start to see, because training is one piece of it, and yeah, you get feedback on the training, and people will want more, and that's always a great indication. A lot of the organizations I'll come back in 6 months and we'll do a follow-up, so that's usually a good indication. But it's really over the long term, because the training piece is just one part of their overall strategy. If they That's the other thing we talk about too, is like it's great to have training, great for leaders, but can't be just that. There's going to be other learning moments. They got to have objectives maybe, or when they're doing their succession planning, they have to be thinking about diversity elements. Maybe there's a mentoring program, so there's lots of different pieces to it. So it's more of a long-term thing, as you start to look at, some of them do collect demographic information on the different groups that they have, and you can see a progression. A lot of them do really good employee engagement surveys, and that's always a good indication too, where they have certain diversity questions incorporated, so you can kind of measure. And then if you're really strong on data, you can start to even dissect that and find out, which groups said they felt most included. Because sometimes you might get like, oh, 80% of our employees feel included, and we realize it's 100% of one population, oh, but only 50% of this population, right? So that's probably the best way to measure things, but it's still tricky. I'm not going to lie, it's not always easy to measure the impact of like one training or one session. That's why it's better for it to be part of a longer term strategy.
Sima, I want to end with this. After a modest time, 15
Yeah.
years, how? How do you feel that, how do you feel like the industry has changed during that time? Do you feel like people are more receptive than they were? Do you feel like people understand why this has to be done,
Mm.
or nothing's changed?
Well, I think there's been a pendulum. So there was a big pendulum switch into, yeah, diversity is important, inclusion, et cetera, is really important. And now, it's sort of coming back this way. Like, so there's still an interest. But the thing is, anytime something gets a lot of momentum, so with the Black Lives Matter movement, everybody's wanting training. A lot of people entered the space that had no experience. Just because you have a lived experience doesn't mean that you have an expertise in the area, right? So a lot of people, I mean, all of a sudden the space was flooded with like, oh, this consultant, that consultant, keynote speaker, like who is everybody? And some people are fantastic. I think some great people showed up, and then others who had less experience. And so that wasn't helpful because then of course you're starting to build strategies that don't work. And so the good thing is now people are being a little bit more thoughtful in what they're asking for. So before it was like, check the box, let's just do this. I think a lot of organizations said, okay, we did all these things, it didn't work, so let's re-question again why we're doing it. And so that's okay too. I think a lot of the trainings I'm doing now, we're kind of coming back to the basics and being like, okay, let's just talk about why we're doing this. How is it good for your team? And those were conversations we sort of had years before, and everyone knows, yeah, we know it's good. What do we do next? And now we're sort of bringing it back to, okay, before we move on to what's next, let's just remind ourselves why we're here, why, this work is important, how it can help your organization, your company, et cetera. So that's one of the ways that, it's sort of swinging back and forth. There's still a lot happening in the space, especially in the US. Like there's been a huge backlash, and luckily in Canada, our government supports this type of work, whereas that's not the same in the US. So a lot of organizations have had to scale back on what they're doing, and luckily we haven't experienced that here.
Sema, thank you so much for doing this. I love your energy, and it was a really interesting conversation.
Thank you so much, Antoine. And again, I'm really happy to have this conversation with you.